This next story is one the government didn't want you to know about, probably because it shows just how terribly wrong the so-called war on terror went 5 years ago. Details about what happened to a Canadian software engineer in the fall of 2002 are just now coming to light, and it is a terrifying tale that says a lot about our country today. Keeping them honest, here's CNN's Jason Carroll.
We now know Washington wanted to keep this story a secret. It was 2002 at JFK Airport in New York, almost exactly 1 year after the terrorist attack of 9/11. A husband is flying home on American Airlines Flight 65. He has a layover here to change planes, and then suddenly, he simply disappears. He never gets home to Canada.
He told me, "I'll call you as soon as I arrive in Montreal."
Her husband, Maher Arar, was stopped at JFK. U.S. Customs agents told him something he didn't know, that he was on the U.S. terror watch list.
They told me, you are not a suspect. We're just going to ask you some questions and we'll let you catch the next plane, but this did not happen.
No one said why, he says, but Arar was arrested and soon moved to this detention center in New York. Hours would pass, then a day, then longer. He was allowed no calls. Arar's wife was in a panic. She called the airlines, the Canadian embassy. No one could tell her anything. It was as if he'd vanished.
I was just left waiting, and that wait without nothing.
In New York, a federal INS agent told Arar they suspected he was affiliated with Al-Qaeda, a charge Arar vehemently denied. The agent said they were flying him to Syria. Arar was stunned. He'd left there 16 years ago to become a Canadian citizen.
I protested. I said, if you send me back to Syria, I'll be tortured.
In fact, the U.S. State Department's own literature says torture is most likely to occur under questioning in Syria.
And what did they say in response?
Well, they just didn't care.
Finally, 6 days after being taken into U.S. custody, Arar says he was allowed to call. His wife is relieved to hear from him and then horrified.
He said, "I'm in New York, I'm in Brooklyn, in Federal Prison Bureau," something like that, "and I need a lawyer. I might be deported to Syria."
Arar begged the INS agent not to send him.
For me, it was very clear that the message is we don't care. That's why we are sending you to Syria. We're sending you there to be tortured.
I'm just wondering psychologically what that must have been like for you at that point.
I lost hope. I was disoriented. I just wanted a miracle to happen.
October 8th, 12 days after being held in U.S. custody, Arar is flown to Jordan, then Syria.
During the entire trip, frankly, I was constantly thinking about, once I am in Syria, how can I avoid torture? That was all I was thinking about.
Well, just ahead, we'll tell you what he faced when he finally reached Syria. Before the break, we told you the terrifying story about a Canadian software engineer who was arrested at New York's Kennedy Airport in 2002. He was told he was on the U.S. terror watch list, and 12 days later, he was deported to Syria, his homeland, which he'd left years before, and where he knew that torture awaited him. This is a story the U.S. government did not want you to know about. Keeping them honest. Once again, here's CNN's Jason Carroll.
Maher Arar, an engineer, husband, and father, accused by U.S. officials of being affiliated with Al-Qaeda, now in a Syrian prison, awaiting interrogation.
I just wanted to end my life.
So look around in this room for anything at all.
Anything.
To kill yourself.
I would rather die than, face torture.
Day 1, he says there were threats. Day 2, the beatings began.
He asked me, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Yes, it's a cable." And he hit me like crazy. It was so painful to the point where I forgot every enjoyable moment in my life.
Interrogators accused Arar of training at a terrorist camp in Afghanistan. When he denied it, denied any connection at all. They beat him more.
They kept telling me all the time that I was lying to them.
Then he says they threatened electric shock.
Just to hear the screams of people being tortured, you would say to yourself, I'm going to tell them whatever they want me to say.
Back home, Arar's wife worked with Canadian officials, hoping to find him, hoping to get him released.
My daughter was all the time asking me where my dad is coming, and I said, he will come soon.
Nearly a year would pass before this would end. Arar remembered one especially violent session.
Because of fear, I couldn't control my muscles and my nerves anymore. So imagine the clothes that I urinated in. I kept them on. I kept them on for like 2 months. And that alone was like very humiliating.
And while his family had no idea where he was, his pain was made even worse because he had no idea if anything had also happened to them.
That alone was torture in its own. Not knowing, you see, I had all those scary thoughts in my mind. Are my kids being kidnapped like me? Is my wife being kidnapped?
Arar says the interrogators broke his will. He finally signed a confession he had received terrorist training in Afghanistan, a country he says he has never been to. And that same day, he was released and sent back to Canada. 10 months and 10 days since he landed in New York, since he had last seen his family.
Frankly, given what I had gone through, I didn't expect that I would ever be reunited with my family again.
I felt that this is another person, not the person that I married.
3 years later, an independent Canadian commission found the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had given the U.S. inaccurate and inflammatory information about Arar. Canada paid Arar's family $11.5 million. The Prime Minister apologized and said the U.S. should also clear Arar's name.
The Government of Canada has every right to go to bat for one of its citizens when the government believes a Canadian is being unfairly treated by another country.
Which brings us to today, more than 5 years since Arar's terrible ordeal began. The U.S. still has his name on the terror watch list. The Department of Justice says classified information shows he's a threat. So Arar is suing the federal government, alleging the U.S. rendered him to Syria to be tortured.
If this pillar of the justice system if its role is diminished, what is the difference then between the United States and other countries?
Keeping them honest, we wanted to know why Arar, who holds a Canadian passport, was sent to Syria. The Justice Department declined an interview. In a statement, it said it received assurances from Syria he would not be tortured, and Arar was lawfully deported. But during this congressional hearing 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of State admitted mistakes were made.
I'm aware of the inquiry, and as I said, we do not think that this case was handled as it should have been.
For Arar, that's not enough. He wants compensation and an official apology.
Do you think you're going to get what you're asking for here?
Things take time. Year, 2, 5 years, 10 years, but I'm hoping that one day the American government will do the right thing.
Jason Carroll, CNN, Ottawa, Canada.
We're going to stay on the story and let you know if Maher Arar gets an apology.